The Circle at Aston-Adey, a short story adaptation of Somerset Maugham's play, The Circle. Narrated by Daniel. Aston-Adey had been photographed so often that the house sometimes seemed to pose for itself. The Georgian drawing room, cream panelling, gilt frames, a cool parade of chairs that knew their provenance, looked out through French windows onto gardens with the self-assurance of a duchess offering her best profile. Country life had taught readers to call it a place rather than a mere house, but no magazine spread could capture the way the morning sun sifted into the room like fine flour. Arnold Champion-Cheney paused on the threshold and, as if to steady himself by ceremony, adjusted the angle of a chair by half an inch. He lifted a porcelain figurine, blew away a microscopic trace of dust, and rang the bell. He was 35, tall, properly handsome in the way of men who have not let themselves go, and so tidy in mind and suit that one pitied any speck that dared land on his lapel. "Elizabeth," he called towards the garden. Then, when no reply came, called again. The footman arrived first. "George, ask Mrs. Cheney if she would—" Arnold began, then stopped. "And who dusts this room?" "I don't rightly know, sir." "Please ask them, when they dust, to replace every object exactly where they found it." "Yes, sir." "And do find Mrs. Cheney." He turned back to his chairs, as if correct upholstery might brace him for the day. Through the windows, he saw a figure in the garden. "Oh, Anna, have you seen Elizabeth?" Anna Shenstone came in from the clipped, scented morning. She was around 40, elegant without being startling, with a face that suggested she could be counted on at a dull country weekend to make people feel less dull. "Isn't she playing tennis? I thought she and Teddy were having a single," Anna said. "I checked the court. She's not there. Something very tiresome has happened," Arnold confessed. "Oh?" "My father is at the cottage. Arrived last night." Anna lifted her brows. "I thought he was in Paris for a month." "So did I. So did everyone." He looked at the garden again, as though it might hand him his wife and a solution. "I wish he hadn't. It would have been simpler. Do you want me to vanish before luncheon? One can always discover an aunt in need." "No, please stay. It will be easier with people in the house," he half smiled. "And I was glad to have Teddy Luton down. He is so very breezy." "That's his great asset," Arnold said, which from him was high praise. "There are moments when a bull in a china shop is exactly what you want." "Not in this particular china shop, I hope," Anna laughed, glancing at the Sheraton and Hepplewhite candidates. The door opened, and Elizabeth drifted in, all light and summer frock, and a face that caught the eye as a bright coin catches sunlight. At 25, she had the sheen of newness and the trick, half natural, half art, of making people want to be decent to her. The hair that broke Arnold's general theories about redheads framed a face lively with thought and mischief. "My dear," Arnold said, relief making him abrupt. "I've been hunting for you everywhere. What have you been doing?" "Nothing. Standing on my head," she said, and smiled at Anna before she saw the tightness around Arnold's eyes. "What is it?" "My father is here." "Where?" She looked as if someone had dropped a pebble into the bright pool of the morning. "At the cottage. Arrived last night." "Damn." Arnold winced. "I wish you wouldn't say that. If one can't say damn when a thing is damnable, when is one to say damn?" She threw Anna a look of mock innocence. "Perhaps bother," Arnold suggested without conviction. She laughed, and Anna, who had known Elizabeth for 3 years, could tell the laugh was ammunition. It kept panic from her voice. "I suppose he's coming for luncheon?" Anna asked. "Yes, he is." "And—" Arnold hesitated. "Lady Catherine and Lord Porteous are motoring down." Anna's eyes darted to Elizabeth's face, then back to Arnold. "Ah. I assumed my father would be in Paris," Arnold said. "It would have been more manageable." Elizabeth touched his hand. "We'll manage. We must." "You insisted on asking them," Arnold reminded her, not harshly, but with the weary justice of a man who likes life to follow a plan. "I did. After all, she's your mother." Elizabeth's voice softened. "It seemed heartless to pretend we hadn't heard she was in London." "I do not see the advantage of being her son," Arnold murmured. He tried for coolness, but pain scuffed its feet through his tone. "When she went away, she made a small sensation of it. My father never speaks of her. I imagine he will not relish her appearance in this room." "When did he last live here?" Anna asked. "Not after that night," Arnold said, paring the story down to its bones. "There was a house party. My mother and Hughie Porteous didn't come down to dinner. They found a note on the pincushion. Since then, my father has kept to a cottage. He gave me the house when I married." He looked round his room, as if to check that its lines had not shifted while he spoke. Elizabeth lowered her eyes. She knew the other half of the story because she had, in a way, written it. It had been her letter, not Arnold's, that went to Lady Catherine Champion-Cheney at Claridge's. "Perhaps," Elizabeth said gently, "it's a chance to bring old things into the light. 30 years is a long time to keep curtains drawn." Arnold made a small helpless gesture. The continental shrug he would have mocked in another. "After all this time, what am I to call her? What am I to feel? She had everything, and she ran away." "She loved," Elizabeth answered. "It's not a crime in itself. It is when honor and duty are treated as negotiable," Arnold replied, and because he was fair, he added almost apologetically, "I know you don't see it as I do." Elizabeth looked at him with a weariness she hid from most people. "I see many things," she said lightly. "For example, that you are about to straighten that second chair." He laughed, and the room, which had seemed to lean forward to catch their words, relaxed. A head appeared at the French windows, brown-eyed, sunburnt, eager. "I say, what about this tennis?" Teddy Luton asked. "Come in, Teddy," Elizabeth said. "We're having a scene." "What about?" "The English language, infidelity, and Georgian furniture," she said. "In no particular order." "As long as no one split an infinitive," Teddy grinned, and stood quietly when he felt the undercurrent. Teddy had spent the war, and the years after, in the Federated Malay States, where the days begin early and one learns to be cheerful for the sake of the people around one. Cheerfulness, on him, did not look like an effort. He had the look of a man who decided long ago to get on with it. Arnold sketched the situation and its potential embarrassments. Teddy's brown eyes widened. "Thought they were in Florence," he said. "By Jove." They were. Now they're in London. "Now they're here," Elizabeth said. She did not add what pulsed under the statement. "Now they are in my head." Arnold checked his watch. "We shall know in an hour whether we are brave or fools," he said. "Perhaps both." Anna squeezed Elizabeth's elbow. "If there's unpleasantness, we'll be moral support. That is, after all, why we were invited." "This is not true," Teddy protested. "I was asked for my blue eyes." "They are brown," Elizabeth said. "They are," Teddy admitted cheerfully, "but I like to think of them as blue in spirit. Before Arnold could find a retort, a figure came lightly through the garden and into the room. A tall, spare man in his early 60s, with the sort of careful grooming that announces, "I am both older and more amused than you." His hair, silver and splendid, gave his face a distinction that his eyes gladly ruined with mischief. "May I be vulgar and come in through the window?" Clive Champion-Cheney asked. "Or shall I stand on ceremony and wait to be announced by a flunky of classical superciliousness?" "Come in," Elizabeth laughed and offered her cheek. He kissed her and then shook Arnold's hand. "We thought you'd be in Paris for another month," she said. "I always reserve to myself the privilege of changing my mind," Clive replied. "It is the only one elderly gentlemen share with pretty women." He glanced up at the pictures. "You've been at your altar again, Arnold?" Arnold gestured to a new chair. "About 1750. Look at the legs." "Charming," Clive said smoothly, and then confided to Elizabeth's smile, "I am entirely ignorant on these matters." It took a handful of minutes for the social scrim to fall back into place. Introductions, Teddy's quick declaration that he played bridge, Clive's equally quick classification of him as a good young man because he never declared without top honors. Then Elizabeth, with a nerve she did not know she had until that week, dismissed the servants and, alone with her father-in-law, told him what she had done. "You must not blame Arnold," she said. "It's my fault. I wrote to her. I asked them to come." Clive's shoulders dipped in a small movement that could have been laughter, resignation, or pocketed pain. "My dear child," he said, and the old pet name placed her immediately. "This is your house. It seemed inhuman to pretend we didn't know she was in town. Whatever her faults, she is Arnold's mother." Elizabeth's voice had that lift that turns a statement into a plea. "I thought, perhaps, there's so much to say to a person one has not had." "Are you happy with Arnold?" Clive asked, in the tone of a man who knows how impertinent he is and intends it nonetheless. "Why shouldn't I be?" Elizabeth parried. "Why haven't you any babies?" he asked. "Give us time," she said. It came out playful and not quite convincing. They spoke of Lady Catherine. Elizabeth, with the romance of the young who suppose that love buys interest on its capital, sketched a pale, grave lady with thin hands in black silk and old lace, sitting among Florentine satyrs of carved walnut. Clive let her run on, and then described, not unkindly, a very pretty, very gay little creature, light on her feet, with a delicious nose. The portrait was fresh paint, laid over a canvas of old wrinkles. "And Lord Porteous?" Elizabeth asked, half curious, half conspiratorial. Hughie was handsome. Yellow hair and blue eyes, good clothes, and a seat at the Foreign Office. "He was my dearest friend. Your husband's godfather, you know," Clive said, and watched how the words touched his listener's face. Watching people for their reaction had become, over the past 30 years, one of his gentler vices. When he went, Teddy took his place by the window with the air of a man strolling into weather he knows will be pleasant. The talk slid from house parties to the FMS, where the sky stayed blue and sincerity was a tool rather than a pose. It amused Elizabeth to discover how lightly Teddy dismissed the conversation of London, people babbling about art they don't care about, and how fiercely he defended his planters. "England's ripping to come back to," he said, "but I couldn't live here now. It's like a woman you adore in the abstract, and when you see her, you remember why you left." "And the FMS?" Elizabeth asked. "The right sort of woman loves it," he answered. "She needs courage and endurance and truth." and she has to be in love with her husband. Otherwise, the jungle is too honest. He stopped and actually listened to his own words. Something somewhere had sounded like a bell. "Do you know I'm awfully in love with you?" he said suddenly. Elizabeth's breath caught. "I wondered," she said softly, gravely. "I wondered." She didn't let him kiss her, and because she didn't, the room around them changed. The car drew up on the gravel like a plot point. Lady Catherine Champion-Cheney came into her old drawing room not as the pale, grave figure Elizabeth had summoned out of air, but as a dazzling contradiction. Her hair, a copper that insisted on its own youth, sat triumphant above a face beautifully, blatantly arranged. Her frock was too much by half, and yet she wore it like a tale with a good ending. Behind her, Lord Porteous arrived like a commentary, very bald, wrapped in loose eccentricities, and grumpy with the English climate. "My boy," Lady Kitty cried, arms already high for an embrace, towards Teddy. "That's Arnold," Elizabeth murmured, saving them both. Lady Kitty pivoted on nothing, threw her arms around Arnold's neck, and declared she would have known him anywhere. Porteous complained about the road and his teeth. Lady Kitty admired a chair on principle and misnamed it, then converted the mistake into a performance, complete with amateur theatricals in Florence and a famous tragedian who could not forget her Lady Teazle. She announced her recent conversion to Rome with the bright pride of a woman who has found a new hat that suits her face. They were still juggling manners when tragedy struck. She had lost her lipstick. Small comedies ration the air in tense rooms. Everyone patted pockets and peered under cushions. Then Clive stepped in through the open window, holding up a little gold case like a saint, brandishing a relic. "Has anyone mislaid a diminutive utensil containing a favorite preparation for the toilet?" he asked. Lady Kitty clasped the case. "It's St. Anthony," she cried, then, seeing him, tried to reframe the exclamation as a greeting. "Clive." "Kitty," he said, and kissed her cheek with ceremonial Englishness while asking Hughie if he minded. "Ooh," said Hughie, which Clive chose to interpret as consent. They went into luncheon, with their collective dignity just intact. Bridge that afternoon was a lawless affair. Lady Kitty and Hughie were partners, an alliance that raised eyebrows and hackles. Anna played against them with Teddy, while Elizabeth and Clive watched. The game unraveled into crosstalk and small detonations. Porteous declared that it was impossible to play with voices in his ear and minds breathing down his neck. Lady Kitty trounced his temper and trumped his ace. He accused her of seeing his hand. She informed him he made it impossible not to. Teddy called a revoke. Hughie denied the possibility with injured grandeur until the cards convicted him. It ought to have been tiresome, but their fripping, Clive's word, was so sharp and habitual that it scanned as a kind of duologue perfected over 30 years. When patience replaced bridge, the spectacle sharpened. Hughie laid out his cards with the dignity of a man conning a war map. Kitty and Clive tried, with that special kind of helpfulness which is a form of aggression, to suggest moves. "That 7 goes on the 8, Kitty said. "The knave goes on the queen," Clive added. "Damn you both," Hughie exploded at last, flinging down a 3 as if it were an accusation. "Am I playing this, or are you?" Lady Kitty gave a little flounce, and then, 2 steps later, began to cry. She went out. Hughie, muttering about how women always cried, stumped into the garden. Clive looked from the empty doorway to Elizabeth. "Upon my soul," he said, "they might be married. They quarrel so much. It has been helpful to have you here." Elizabeth said, and then regretted the irony in her voice. Clive's eyes brightened. He had heard it. You promised to keep away, she added. Why did you come back the moment they arrived? Curiosity, he replied. A surely pardonable curiosity. Also, they are very funny. He did not soften what came next. Elizabeth learned, in 5 minutes, more about her mother-in-law than romance had taught her in 5 days. Clive sketched with exquisite cruelty and a fairness that made the cruelty more interesting. The thinning out of Kitty's soul into affectation, the change of animation into chatter, the life among damaged people in Florence, the nightly drinking Hughie used to forget that he had ruined his career for love. She has ruined him, Clive said, and she knows it. Why are you saying this to me? Elizabeth asked. I like you, he said, and I am wickedly amused by circles. Before she could decide whether to be offended, Teddy returned, and the room shifted onto its other hinge. They spoke with the clear seriousness of people who have run out of ways to avoid the obvious. Teddy began, in practicality, and ended in a mess of sincerity. He had never been in love. He wanted her, all of her, or nothing. He tried to keep emotion out of it, and then found himself murmuring, I love you, because there is no way around the old words. Elizabeth cried because she was trying not to cry. Let's not be dramatic, he said, desperately lighting a cigarette to give his hands a job. I'm a businessman. This is a business proposition. Chuck all this and come to me. Are you cross with me? She asked, laughter and tears mixing in her voice. Furious, he said, and she called him darling and promised she would tell Arnold herself. He offered to stand beside her. She told him she must stand on her own feet. They did not kiss. They held hands like people making a contract. The gravel sounded under a car. Arnold stepped in with the business in his eyes. Elizabeth left to bathe her face. Arnold asked for Teddy. He kept control almost to the end. It was not only that he was hurt, he was disarranged, and disarrangement to Arnold was a personal affront. He demanded and received the truth. Teddy stood solid, frank, neither apologizing nor swaggering. He was going to London, he said. He could go sooner if desired. He was in love with Elizabeth. He wanted to marry her. Arnold did not swear, which was a pity, because it might have done him good. He threatened a solution as precise as an Act of Parliament. If Elizabeth ran away, he would go down to Brighton with a chorus girl within 24 hours. The action would shut the court's doors in everyone's face. Get out, he said. Get out now. Teddy glanced at Elizabeth. She nodded, half the bravest thing she had ever done. He went. Night, that forgiving decorator, blue-washed the day's quarrels. Clive found Arnold and offered what he called advice. Others would have called it tactics. Tell her the bars are gone, he said. Tell her she may go. Sacrifice yourself, and she will not take the sacrifice. Women adore giving themselves pain when the alternative is giving us pleasure. I don't like it, Arnold said. It's against my principles. Clive clicked his tongue. My dear boy, principles are very useful. They can always be sacrificed to expediency. He smiled. Do as I say. Before the next move in the game, Clive and Arnold went to the cottage and returned with an old leather album that smelled faintly of dust and old scent. Elizabeth, who loved old things when they were not sermons, settled with it on her knees. Clive pointed. Mrs. Langtry in her famous profile. Mary Anderson as Perdita, Barnum's beauties, the golden romantic faces that had lit the gas of another generation. Then a small, exquisite woman in furs, smiling at the camera through an artificial snowfall, dainty, debonair, eyes full of mischief. "Oh, who is that?" Elizabeth asked. "She's adorable." "That?" Clive said, watching her. "That is Kitty." Elizabeth carried the book to Lady Kitty as if it might help. Kitty looked, and her face crumpled, not ostentatiously, not for applause. She covered her eyes and wept with something that sounded very like honesty. Elizabeth, whose imagination had just furnished her with a mother in black lace, felt the room tilt. Porteous, unwillingly moved, went to Kitty and put a big hand on her shoulder. They said sorry, as people do, who have practiced quarreling and making peace so long that both have their rhythms. He told her she had not changed. She told him he was absurd. They talked of San Michele and the first summers in Italy, of the castle terrace, where they had believed the world contained only two people. They laughed through tears about Western Australia and Barbados and India. He offered jealousy grudgingly, and she lit at it like a lamp. He looked at the photograph again and told her with a little smile that a woman with good bones is never truly old. Their peace made the room gentle, so that when Clive returned to say very softly, "Elizabeth wants to leave Arnold," it was more shocking. He asked Kitty to talk to the girl. "Not for Arnold's sake," he added, "for hers." It was not a plea Kitty had expected to hear. She looked at Porteous and saw him say, without moving his mouth, "Do what you like. I will not blame you for anything." A note arrived from the Champion Arms, that sad hybrid of village pub and would-be hotel. Elizabeth slipped it into her bag and asked Lord Porteous to fetch the boy waiting in the summer house down by the tennis court. She and Kitty were left together. The room felt like a stage. Just after the curtain goes up, the air quivers. "You must despise me," Elizabeth began. "Arnold is your son." "I have very little right to despise anyone," Kitty said, with the faintest of smiles. She sat, took Elizabeth's hand, put it down again, picked up a cushion instead. "Are you in love?" "With all my heart," Elizabeth said simply, "and he with me." "Will Arnold let you divorce him?" "Number, he won't hear of it. He won't even divorce me." "Ah." Kitty's face changed. "I am sorry." "I'm willing to accept the consequences," Elizabeth said, and heard the bravery in her voice and wondered if she could live up to it. Kitty leaned forward. It was, Elizabeth realized, the first time she had seen her really still. "You don't know what it means to have a man tied to you only by honor. If married people don't get on, there's law. If you are not married, there is only fear." "If Teddy stopped caring," Elizabeth said, "I would not keep him 5 minutes." Kitty's smile was quick and pitying. "One says that when one is sure." She took a breath. "Have you any money of your own?" "None." "Then you cannot stand on your own feet. The suffrage is very fine in the newspapers, but the man who pays the piper calls the tune. When woman earns as man does, she will be his equal. Until then, no." Elizabeth could not help it. She laughed gently. "Forgive me. It's funny to hear it from you." "I have learned it in a very expensive school," Kitty said. "Luxury becomes a habit and then a necessity, and London is full of charming people who will love you as long as they can do it at the right hour of the afternoon." She drew a breath and took courage from, of all places, her painted lips. "The first 2 years were heavenly. People cut me. I didn't mind. I thought love was everything. But men are not in love all day long. They require recreation. Florence gave us what it gives everyone who chooses not to see: bad company, beautiful weather. I could not let him go big game shooting. I was terrified he would not return. Jealousy turns religion if one is not careful." Elizabeth did not know what to say to that, so Kitty told her a secret in the style of a woman who believes secrets to be presents. "My hair," she said, an odd triumph in her tone, "is not naturally this color. It is white, really, prematurely, of course, but white. I think it is a symbol. Are you interested in symbols?" Elizabeth shook her head. Kitty went on. "I had to be gay when I wanted to cry. When I saw he was attracted by someone else, I had to pretend not to notice." She paused and waited to see whether Elizabeth would flinch. Elizabeth did, and Kitty looked almost proud. "There were others," she added lightly, as if she were offering a bonbon. "A little count in Florence, later a dear Antonio who, well, men say such things. I never let them carry their threats out. I was faithful to Hughie in spirit." Elizabeth stared at this painted, charming, dissolute old woman and understood something for the first time. That love not only breaks codes and laws, it breaks, if one is not very careful, the person who uses it to fight the world. Horror rose in her like nausea. "Are you shocked?" Kitty asked, pleased and penitent. "I am—" Elizabeth searched for the word. "I am sorry." Arnold came in then, as if cued. He did not storm. He asked her very courteously whether they might speak. Kitty, obedient to the drama of the moment, glided out. Arnold, who had practiced a dozen speeches and abandoned them, said at last the thing he had not planned to say. "I behaved very badly when you told me," he began. "Forgive me. I am stupid about these things, and I love you very much." "Arnold," she said, helpless, because what could she do with kindness? "I am in love with you," he said, surprised to hear himself say it. "I have been since the first time I saw you. I have been tactless and absorbed and all the rest of it, but it was not because I did not love you. If you love this man and want to go to him, I will not prevent you. I will do what is best for you." She shut her eyes. It would have been easier to be hit. He went on. "You have been used to certain things. I cannot bear—" He paused. The word bear had weight. "I cannot bear to think you might be in want. Let me settle 2,000 a year on you." "No." She put her hands over her face as if the offer were light she could not look into. "Number, please, do not make me feel small." "I will open an account in your name at my bank," he said, as if it were done. "Whether you touch it or not, it will be there." "Arnold," she whispered, "you make me miserable." "There is one thing more," he added. "I will not divorce you, but I will give you cause to divorce me." She stared. "You?" "Yes," he said, and almost smiled at the absurdity of the conversation. "We have had enough divorces in our family that are flamboyant. Better this way, but you must be careful for a bit. I'll put it through as soon as possible." "Your seat, your career," she said. "You love them." "One cannot serve God and mammon," he said. "If we do the decent thing, we must be prepared to suffer. I would rather suffer than have you do so." She looked at him as people look at statues, with awe and terror and a faint suspicion that marble is not the right material for a human being. He asked, very humbly, whether he might kiss her. He kissed her on the forehead like a father and went away to do work, because work is a faith too. When he had gone, Elizabeth went to the garden door and told the knight to steady her. Then she asked Lord Porteous, who had returned with Kitty's cloak, to fetch Teddy from the summer house. "Forgive me," she said, as he went. "It's important." Porteous, who was beginning to enjoy the evening as one of the better entertainments he had seen in years, nodded and disappeared. Kitty offered Elizabeth a lipstick for courage and was rebuffed with a smile. She fussed, touched Elizabeth's cheek, and then, hearing footsteps, melted back with Porteous towards the window. "Did you want me?" Teddy asked Elizabeth. "I did," Arnold said, entering from the hall. "No," Elizabeth said quickly. "I did." Teddy stopped. The house had been cruel to him, and he resented the way his heart leapt at Elizabeth's face. "I can't come with you," she said immediately, before he could say anything to make it harder. "I don't love you enough." "Fiddle," he said, which was the wrong word. "Don't say fiddle to me," she snapped, and then hated herself for snapping. "I asked you to be serious." He took her hands. "I am serious. I know you love me, and I love you. What's happened?" She told him briefly, and the noble generosity of Arnold sat between them like a third person. Teddy listened, and for once did not joke. "It ties my hands," she finished, helplessly. "I cannot profit by such kindness. I should hate myself." "If another fellow and I were devilish hungry," Teddy said, "and there was only one chop, and he said, 'You take it,' well, I would wolf it before he changed his mind." "Don't be odious," she said, half laughing, half crying. "I'm trying to do right." "You are talking rot," he said, with more tenderness than the words allowed. "You are not in love with Arnold. You are in love with me. A marriage without love is no marriage at all. I made a mistake. Why should he suffer for it? If anyone must suffer, it should be me. What sort of life will that be? When two people are married, it is very difficult for one to be unhappy without making the other unhappy too." She turned to Kitty and Porteous. "Stay, please stay," she said. "We are statues," Kitty said, instantly obedient to drama again, though her eyes were wet. "We shall not stir." Elizabeth shook her head. "It is asking too much," she whispered. "Let's say goodbye." Teddy looked at her, and the pulse in his throat jumped. He leaned in, not to kiss, but to speak close to her face. "I wasn't offering you happiness," he said. "I don't think my sort of love tends to happiness. I'm jealous. I'm not easy to live with. I'd be fed to the teeth with you sometimes, and you with me. You'd be lonely and bored and homesick, and stupid women would be rude to you because we ran away. I don't offer peace and quiet. I offer unrest and anxiety. I don't offer happiness. I offer love." Elizabeth's hands flew to him. "You hateful creature," she breathed. "I absolutely adore you." He kissed her then, as if he might never be allowed to again. Kitty gave a small gasp of recognition and envy. Porteous, to his disgust, felt his eyes prickle. "Let's bolt," Teddy said. "Now, this minute." "You are damned fools," Porteous announced, with a bark that was almost a blessing. "If you like, you can have my car." "That's awfully good of you," Teddy said. "As a matter of fact, I got it out of the garage before dinner. Thought there might be bother." "Got it? Out of the garage?" Porteous spluttered. "Do you mean to say you stole my car?" "Bolshevized it," Teddy said. "Couldn't carry Elizabeth to London. She's so damned plump." "You beast," Elizabeth laughed, and kissed Kitty and Porteous with real gratitude. "Write Arnold a note," Kitty urged. "I will put it on your pincushion." "Pincushions be blowed," Teddy said, fastening Kitty's cloak around Elizabeth's shoulders. "We'll buy a toothbrush in London." "Go to San Michele," Porteous said abruptly. "I will wire. It will be ready." "That's where we went," Kitty whispered, as if to herself. "Oh, you dear things, how I envy you." They went out, hand in hand, into a night that smelt of cut grass and decision. The engine turned and caught. The sound of the car sliding off into darkness and a plan drew a line under the scene. Clive walked in, rubbing his hands, contentment smoothing his face. "I think I have settled the hash of that young man," he announced. "You must get up very early to better your humble servant." "What do you mean?" Kitty asked. "I told Arnold to offer freedom," Clive said. "Remove the bars, and the prisoner does not want to escape. Women adore self-sacrifice." He chuckled. "Downy old bird, eh? Downy." The car's hum dwindled. Kitty's eyes widened. Porteous stared at Clive. "What is that?" Kitty asked. "A car, I believe," Clive said. "One of the maids on a joyride." Porteous began to laugh, the laugh of a man who has lost everything long ago, and so can afford to find this funny. Kitty laughed too, through her tears, because it was either that or break. Clive laughed because it was the best joke he had had in years. The drawing room of Aston-Adey, with its well-placed chairs and its perfect angles, filled with laughter. It sounded very like grief's brighter cousin. They did not, any of them, sleep very much. In the morning, the house registered the changes quietly, the way a good household pretends that scandal is only another form of weather. The gardeners brought in dahlias, with faces like joyful saucers. The butler laid one more place at breakfast than necessary, and removed the extra plate with the grave tact of his trade. Newspapers arrived with London scandals printed in them. In Dorset, the ink felt far away. Arnold sat at his desk with a pen he sharpened like a weapon. He wrote to his agent. He wrote to the chief whip. He wrote, because it steadied him, to the editor of a magazine about Georgian furniture, explaining with carefully marshaled evidence why the legs on a certain chair could not possibly be wrong. Then he folded his hands and looked at the door his wife would not walk through. Clive strolled over from the cottage mid-morning, immaculate, pink carnation neat, and greeted the footmen as if they were ambassadors. He found Arnold and said nothing clever at all, which was his cleverness for the day. "You made a mistake," Arnold said, without rancor. "Your plan." "I always do," Clive said lightly. "I have made a 30-year career of it." "Do you blame me?" Arnold asked. "For what? For being honorable? For being dull?" Clive tapped his cane on the hearth. "You did the decent thing. It put your wife in a position to do the indecent thing honestly. If you had locked the door, she would have climbed out the window. You chose a better site." "Do you think she will be happy?" Arnold asked. "Of course not," Clive said cheerfully. "Neither will he. That is not the point." "What is the point?" Arnold asked sharply, frustrated by the older man's insolence towards suffering. "That they did what they are," Clive said. "Character is plot, my boy. Consequences attend courage as patiently as they attend folly. We are circles. We repeat. The interest lies only in the small alterations we make as we go round." Arnold almost smiled. "You talk as if it were a book." "It is," Clive said, "a well-bound one with tolerable margins." Porteous later suggested that he and Kitty start for Italy by the end of the week. Kitty, after a flutter, agreed with relief. London had already begun to nibble at her. One more luncheon full of sympathetic women, and she would have done something rash with an Italian prince. They would go to San Michele and see whether ghosts keep good houses. If the ghosts were untidy, they would come back to England and get a plumber. Kitty was determined at last to have a bathroom. "Do you suppose it will be very dreadful?" she asked Hughie as they walked in the garden and pretended the gravel did not shift under their feet. "What?" he said. "Seeing the places where we were happy." "Not if one remembers we were very foolish," he replied, "and that we did our best to be foolish well." She thought about that, then laughed. "You will catch cold in Italy," she said. "You always do." "I have new teeth," he said, and their laughter, which began in absurdity, moved into tenderness without either of them noticing. Anna Shenstone said goodbye with tact so light it seemed like friendship. She pressed Elizabeth's forgotten book of poems into Arnold's hand. He took it and did not open it. When she squeezed Clive's fingers, he winked at her. "We will have a quiet rubber when you are back," he said, "without revokes." "Without spectators," she returned. "Your commentary is fatal to patience." Teddy's room was stripped by noon. The maid sent Elizabeth's note down for Arnold. It said nothing dramatic, only that she was sorry and that she could not. She asked him to give her love to Anna. She did not sign it with the name she was leaving behind. She wrote Elizabeth, as if that might make it kinder. In London, at a discreet hotel where one could be married or divorced or slightly scandalous with equal comfort, Teddy produced cash and hope and a talent for laughing at bad coffee. Elizabeth bought a toothbrush because Teddy had promised. Then she bought a cheap scarf because her hair blew everywhere in an open car, and she thought she would go mad if she did not put it under control. They slept at odd hours and woke at wrong ones, and found that love, when it becomes practical, is oddly full of maps and mundane questions. How much petrol? Whether the eggs are fresh? Whether she prefers tea black or with a ridiculous quantity of sugar? He discovered that she cried at moving picture newsreels. She discovered that when he was very happy, his ears went pink. She laughed at him. He called her plump, and then, properly chastened, kissed every inch of the cloak she had borrowed. They went to the coast and crossed to France. In Paris, Teddy took her to a café with chairs outside on a pavement, and she pretended not to notice that every woman wore her frock better than Elizabeth wore hers. But later, when they were alone in a little room where the wallpaper looked like faded roses and smelled faintly of cabbage, he knelt to take off her shoes and looked up the way that makes promises seem unnecessary. She thought, "For this, yes, for this I will learn to be brave." In Italy, the air changed hands at the border and came back perfumed. San Michele was white and calm, the sea below it blue, like the hope on a Madonna's robe. The terrace remembered them. The old men remembered, and pretended not to. Women who had once cut Kitty looked at Elizabeth with that complicated kindness women keep for the very young and very doomed. Teddy, to his surprise, found himself sometimes jealous of a house. Elizabeth found herself sometimes jealous of the wind. Neither said anything. They quarreled, of course. People who love do, and they were very much in love. The first one was about a map. The second was about a look he gave a woman at a post office. The third was about nothing, which is the dangerous kind. They learned painfully where each other's bruises lay. After an afternoon of dreadful silence, Elizabeth threw the cheap scarf across the terrace and it sailed like a signal. Teddy went to fetch it and came back contrite. He had never been married. He was trying in fits and starts to become good at it. Porteous's wire arrived. "House ready. The view remains impertinent. We follow. Be good enough to leave some for us." Teddy read it aloud. Elizabeth smiled and considered, for the first time, the comfort of older love. "What will you do when you grow old?" she asked him one evening. "Grow cross," he said, "and adore you." "And if I grow terrible?" "You already are," he said, and she beat him about the shoulders with a cushion until he was gasping and kissed him into forgiveness. Back in Dorset, autumn folded up the last of the dahlias. Arnold allowed himself to be adopted by work, the way some men allow themselves to be adopted by dogs. He took the scandal correctly, quietly, and as if it were not really about him. The newspapers denied a circus, moved on to other clowns. He went to a meeting and spoke so beautifully about drains that old women cried. He began, very privately, to consider that life without Elizabeth might offer the consolation of exactness. He placed his chair. He replaced it. One evening, unobserved, he moved it back to where Elizabeth had once pushed it in passing. He left it there, and something in him loosened. Clive went on as before, beautifully dressed, effortlessly amused, not quite as cruel as he pretended. He took up with a young soprano from the provinces who had a laugh like a silver bell and a mother who wrote grateful letters. On her 25th birthday, he gave her a ring and a speech he had perfected over 20 years. He did not cease to consider Kitty with affection and a touch of horror. When he thought of Elizabeth, he grinned, because for all his vanity, he loved to be wrong. Kitty and Hughie lasted a while in Italy, and then longer. They discovered that one can make peace with ghosts if one brings them offerings. The first offering was humility. The second was a plumber. Kitty got her bathroom. Hughie got teeth that stayed where they were put. They quarreled merrily and made up, less theatrically. "We are ridiculous," Kitty said once. "What shall we do?" "Be ridiculous," Hughie replied. "It is better than being wicked." Once, months later, Arnold received an envelope with a cheap foreign stamp and a picture of a lemon-bright coast. Inside was a postcard. It had a smear of what, with a wry jolt, he recognized as lipstick. It said, in Kitty's unmistakable hand, "Dear Arnold, love to you from two old fools who were once very young fools. Your affectionate Kitty." Arnold sat very still, then put the card in a drawer because he had not yet learned to frame her. Elizabeth wrote to Anna, pages that began in delight and ended in something like prayer. She did not write to Arnold. Once she started a letter and stopped because a letter to him felt like a visit to a grave. She wrote instead to herself, in a notebook she kept under the cheap scarf. Love, she discovered, is hard to spell beautifully every day. Sometimes it is best written badly and sincerely. One morning, in the kind of light that makes even an old priest look young, Teddy came in wet from the sea and stood dripping on the tile floor. He stared at her, astonished anew. "We did it," he said, not triumphantly, not pleadingly, but as an inventory. "We did it." "We did," she said, "and we are doing it." "Are you—" He could not find the word he wanted. Happy was, as he had predicted, not the word. "Alive," she supplied, and he laughed at her and kissed her knees because they were there. In Dorset, frost traced the lawns and made the ghost of a lace shawl. Arnold, walking early in the garden, heard two birds call across the thin morning and answer one another. He looked up at the drawing-room, at the window where Elizabeth had stood, and told him she was leaving. He stood very straight, because the habit of political posture is not easily abandoned, and then allowed himself to slouch like a man. "George," he said later, "that chair. Leave it where it is." "Yes, sir," said the footman gravely, as if Arnold had solved a theological problem. Clive, asked at a dinner in town what he thought of the whole affair, said only, "Circles are dreadfully economical shapes. They use the same line over and over to enclose different spaces." The lady next to him called him a cynic. He bowed and offered her something dreadful and true about human nature that made her laugh in self-defense. Porteous, asked by a young man whether love was worth it, took so long to answer that the youth blushed at his own boldness and wished himself elsewhere. At last, Hughie said, "It depends on the man, the woman, and the weather." The young man went away disappointed. Kitty laughed and called him a brute. But a truthful one, she added, and did not deny the truth with a kiss. Elizabeth, asked by no one, sometimes asked herself, was it worth it? There were days when she would have said no, very softly, and hated herself for saying it. There were others when she would have traded the whole civilized quiet of Aston-Adey for the way Teddy looked at her when he came in from the rain. She had wanted a mother. She had found, instead, her own adulthood. The longing for a different life had been a sweet pain. The life she had chosen was a harder sweetness. She learned that it was possible to be ashamed of one's romanticism and rely on it anyway. The circle did what circles do. It came round again and was not the same. Years on, at an English summer party where the strawberries were chilled and the talk was warm, a young woman admired Arnold Champion-Cheney across a lawn. He looks, she said to her friend, as if he had never made a foolish choice. He has, said Anna Shenstone, who had been invited down for the weekend and always made people feel less dull. He has made several and been splendid in them. And that pretty woman with copper hair? The girl asked, nodding at a photograph in a book on the table, an old album that had somehow found its way back to Aston-Adey and lay, quite at home, beside a very correct book about Sheraton chairs. She was complicated, Anna said. We all are. Have a strawberry. Anna did not tell the girl that sometimes, when she thought of Elizabeth, she thought of a rose in the rain, overblown, perhaps, bedraggled, but still, invisibly, the same rose that had been tight and fragrant days earlier. Beauty, seen once, is not taken away by age. She did not say that love is the only thing that sufficiently rearranges furniture and hearts to make a house a place. She did not say that life is not finally a morality play in which the bad are punished and the good rewarded, but rather a dance in which everyone, sooner or later, stumbles and finds it funny or weeps and is helped or mocked as the music pleases. Still, if one had demanded a moral, she might have offered this: do what you are, but be prepared to pay. The bill, when it comes, is rarely itemized. It is always, in the end, for character. On certain bright mornings, Elizabeth, older now, still beautiful, bones good, stood on the terrace at San Michele and looked at the sea until it seemed to look back. The wind fretted at her hair under the old cheap scarf she had kept because it was who they had been. Teddy, coming in wet and laughing, would grunt at the chill and call her plump and beautiful, and she would call him a brute and make him tea, and their quarrels would be half the furniture of their happiness. Sometimes she wondered whether, in an English drawing-room, a man was moving a chair slightly to the left and smiling because he had decided to leave it there. The thought made her smile. Circles do not close, they continue. At Aston-Adey, on a spring afternoon, much like the one in which it all began, the French windows were open, the old house breathed, and the room was full of that peculiar quiet in which you can hear the past putting itself away and the future laying itself out. In a corner, on a low table whose polish showed a thumbprint Arnold would not remove, lay the photograph of Kitty, young in her artificial snowstorm, face turned towards someone just out of the frame. She was smiling. One could almost hear the car starting. The laugh that followed, Clive's, Kitty's, Hughie's, was a sound the room had kept, like a note that continues after a string is plucked. If you stood there long enough and were very quiet, you could almost believe it was still going on. And perhaps it was. After all, it was a circle.